Hello friends, and welcome back to a new video. Today we'll be wrapping up all the books I read in the months of May and June. So we've made it halfway through the year. We are already in July, which is wild. And May and June went by so quick, but at the same time, they feel like they were such long months, and I read a lot. In May, I didn't read as much. I had a bit of a reading slump going on, especially towards the end of May and early June. And because of that, and because I had also filmed a reading vlog and a couple videos dedicated to specific books I read in May, I decided the other few books that I read that I didn't talk about, I would just lump in with June, not anticipating how many books I would actually read in June. So here we are with a very long list of books to get through, and as terrible as I am at being brief, I will do my best just because I know this video will be long. I'm long-winded. It is just who I am. It's part of my nature, but I will try to be as concise as I can with sharing my thoughts. So there are 20 books total for the months of May and June, and it's a lot, but I know that that's roughly 10 books per month, and some people read more than that, some people read less, but to wrap up 20 books in one video feels very daunting, especially because most of them were wonderful reads. And that is one thing that I am just so grateful for the last couple of months. My reading life, just everything about it has just felt so enriched and just wonderful. A lot of that feeling of enrichment that I have has to do with the Literary Life podcast, which I've talked about many times, and I am so grateful for one of my lovely subscribers. I believe it's Sarah, who recommended the Literary Life podcast. I have been listening to them all the time while washing dishes, while commuting. I just cannot get enough. They have enriched my reading life to heights that I never expected, and I just love them so much. My reading life is just getting better, and I am so grateful for every little thing that makes it all the better, and you are all a part of that as well. It is just such a wonderful place to be here on BookTube, with all of you watching and commenting, and even those who don't comment, just the fact that you watch, thank you so much. And I would love to know, what is it that is enriching your reading life? Is there anything that you've encountered recently, or anything that you are using to supplement your reading, whether it's something as simple as journaling or whatever it may be? What is it that you've been doing that has been livening up your reading life and giving it a new flair and just making it all the more special? Please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear more. So with the books that I read, I will go in the order that I read them roughly. There is one book that I'm going to talk about with another book just because they're both in a series and I do want to keep them together. So I will keep those together, but the rest it's going to be roughly in reading order. And all the books that I've already talked about, whether that was in my May reading vlog or a book review, that sort of thing, I will have the videos linked in the description box where those books are discussed in further detail, and I will just quickly mention my rating, what I thought of the book really briefly before moving on. So any books that I've already talked about, we're not going to rehash all my feelings on them because we would be here for much longer than we already will be. I normally talk about what I've read from least favorite to favorite, but I could not rank the books that I read in the last couple of months. I tried and I just can't. So we are just gonna do the order that I finished them roughly. If you would like, grab yourselves a cozy beverage, make yourselves comfortable, and let's go ahead and get into this wrap up. Just quickly going to mention the books that I am carrying on throughout the summer, and the first one is The Iliad by Homer. I made some progress on this, not a whole lot, but what I did read I am very much enjoying, and am learning a lot of Greek myth that I knew next to nothing about. So very much enjoying this, and I'm finding it a lot more accessible than I was expecting. So this is a hit so far. I am continuing through Lyrical Ballads by Wordsworth and Coleridge, and I did read a couple poems in June. I read Goody Blake and Harry Gill by Wordsworth, which I really enjoyed. And then I also read Lines Written at a Small Distance from My House and Sent by My Little Boy to the Person to Whom They Are Addressed by Wordsworth. And I really liked this one. It's just a poem about joy in nature and finding joy in nature, and it was beautiful. And I'm just taking my time with this. I am going to try to finish it by December. I'm really enjoying these pastoral poems, and I Want to see the Lake District so bad. And speaking of the Lake District, I did start this mammoth, which is Beatrix Potter, A Life in Nature by Linda Lear. I am loving this so far. Oh my goodness. I feel like I'm getting to know Beatrix as a friend, and the writing is beautiful, and the Lake District descriptions are just breathtaking. I'm highlighting and tabbing and just taking my time with this because I don't want it to end. And there's just so much to learn about Beatrix. She led such a fascinating life, and I'm loving this so much. This little passage here, she wasn't describing the Lake District, but it was beautiful. She says, "The autumn frost spreads a ruddy glow over the land, miles upon miles of golden oak wood, with here and there a yellow streak of stubble and a clump of russet walnut trees behind the red gable, and thin blue smoke of a farm. In summer, the distant landscapes are intensely blue." So the author really gives us insight into her childhood, her hobbies, her incredible inquisitive mind and artistic abilities, the various artists that she was just in love with, and I have learned so much just about the world of art, and oh my goodness, I'm obsessed with this. And this really inspired me in my own learning, I guess, my own very lackluster education in florography and art and everything. I know nothing about flowers, about art. I can tell a rose from a tulip, but besides that, I know very little. So I've kind of started my own little flower journal, I guess, and just learning about different flowers and as well as artists. And I haven't filled these yet, but I definitely plan on learning and adding to my very, very limited stock of knowledge, if you will. But I'm very much inspired by Beatrix Potter. What a woman. And I haven't even made it a quarter of the way through this biography, so it is a very special one, that is for sure. And I've also made good progress on Tennyson's major works, and I read a very long poem that I will talk about later in this video. So those are the books that I'm continuing on throughout the summer and through the rest of the year for a couple of them. I'm going to quickly mention the two books that I DNF'd, and they are both historical fiction, which I find interesting, and I'm realizing that my taste for historical fiction has been shifting, it's ever evolving, and I don't know, I was kind of disappointed in a way because these are two books that I've heard great things about and was very hopeful that I would enjoy them. And unfortunately, they're just not for me. But the first one is The Gown by Jennifer Robson. And this one was, I think, a May DNF, and I already forget a lot about what it's about. Right, so it's dual timeline, and the historical timeline, we have a few different perspectives. We have these two characters named Miriam and Anne, and I remember being really, I guess, taken aback by the difference in tone in the way that the author wrote their perspectives, and it wasn't natural. It felt very odd. Actually, I think it was a third character. I think her name was Heather. Yes, Heather was in the modern timeline, and then we have Miriam and Anne in the historical timeline. And Heather in the modern day timeline, I really did not like the writing style. It was very different, very, I feel bad to say it, but almost juvenile. I wasn't jiving with it. And there are a lot of the same type of dual timeline historical fiction stories out there where there is an old woman in the modern day timeline who has ancestors in the historical timeline, and there are mysteries being unraveled and all of that. And it can be done well, it can be really interesting, and I've read books that I love with that kind of, I guess, format, but it just wasn't working for me in this one. So it looks like I had written down that the character of Heather was very irritating, and the way her chapter introducing her was written, it was like it was written by a different author, and yes, I just don't care to try to read this again. So this is just not for me. And then the other book that I DNF'd was one that I had very high expectations for because I had heard amazing things about it, and that is The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle Richardson. It's apparently a book for book lovers. It has to do with the pack horse librarians that were in Kentucky in the South in the Great Depression era in the 1930s. And I've read a book by Jojo Moyes, The Giver of Stars, as well as the one by Kim Vogelsawyer, and I'm blanking on the title. But those two books I really, really loved. They dealt with the same themes and they were done so well. This one I just couldn't get into it, and I don't really care to read it, to be completely honest. I don't know, the Giver of Stars really packed a punch in a way that I find it memorable, and I would definitely reread it in the future. As well, The Librarian of Boone's Hollow is the title, as well as The Librarian of Boone's Hollow. I would definitely reread it in the future. But a few chapters in, I wasn't driving with the story, with the writing style, with the character. There was a scene towards the beginning of the book that was also quite off-putting to read, and I don't know, I didn't have a good feeling. The kind of feeling that I like with gritty historical fiction. And I do love gritty historical fiction, but it's just not the type. I don't know if that makes any sense. Anyways, yada yada, not for me. These are two books that I am just not interested in reading, so they are DNFs. But now we'll go over the books that I finished. So these are all books that I completed in the months of May and June. This first one I already talked about in a book review, and that is Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. Favorite book of the year, one of them. I don't know. We'll see if it makes it to the #1 spot, but one of my favorites of the year for sure. Favorite of all time, 5 big stars. Like I said, I talked about it in its own book review, more like a book gush. I will have that linked below if you want to hear me share my thoughts on this, but this tome was wonderful. It captured my heartstrings, and these characters I will remember forever. I loved them so much. I also wanted to mention I read that with my friend Madelyn, and we both adored it. In May, there was also a readathon going on called the May Flowers Readathon, where you have to read books that have flowers on the cover, and I read several for that readathon. And a few of the books that I read for that readathon I talked about in my May reading vlog, which I will also have linked below. But I first read A Noble Masquerade by Christie Ann Hunter and gave this one, I believe, a 3.75 4-star rating. I really enjoyed it. And you can see there are flowers on this cover. It's a Regency era romance, a lot of fun. And I also read The Vanderbeekers and the Hidden Garden by Karina Jan Glaser, and this one I gave 4.5 out of 5 stars. I loved it. And although this one doesn't have flowers on the cover, and the cover doesn't look very springish floral, the book is set in spring and it's very floral. It is all about gardening, and it is just all flowers galore. I don't understand the cover choice for this book because it does not reflect what's on the inside of the book, but this one I cheated with, but it still counts in my eyes. Then we have the wonderful Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon, Volume 4, and there are flowers all over this cover and the back. 5 stars. Loved this one so much. So those 3 books were all in that reading vlog. And another book that I talked about in my May reading vlog that is not part of that readathon, but I did read it in May, is Dark Fire by C.J. Sansom, and I buddy read this with my friend Tammy, and we both adored this book and gave it 5 stars. Fantastic Tudor era historical mystery, so wonderful, so atmospheric and summery and stifling in its atmosphere. It's just wonderful. There is one more book that I read for the Mayflowers readathon that I just didn't have a chance to talk about in any video, and that is Sad Cypress by Agatha Christie, and this is going down as one of my top Agatha Christie's on my favorites list. I loved this one so much and gave it 5 stars, and as you can see, there are roses on the cover, so that one counted for the readathon. And I am so relieved that I read a 5-star Agatha Christie, because for the last 1.5 to 2 years, most of the Agatha Christie books I've been reading have been fine. I haven't found a true gem in a long time. I read another one earlier this spring called A Dumb Witness and really enjoyed that one. And then I read this one and I'm like, finally, I'm finding the really good Agatha Christie's again, because I feel like I've read all the good ones now. And anyways, I loved this one so much, and it's a really unique one as it is a Poirot mystery, but we spend time getting to know these characters without Poirot there until after this murder occurs, and then we spend time in the courtroom with Poirot. So we have a bit of like an English countryside vibe for a good chunk of the book, and then a courtroom mystery aspect to it, and I just found that so enjoyable and very different. We have this woman named Eleanor who is accused of murdering a friend from her childhood who has kind of become a rival in love. She has attracted the attention of Eleanor's fiance, and it seems like the motive may have been jealousy, and this murder victim, Mary, is very likable, and Eleanor is kind of, I don't know, a very odd person, and the fiance as well, not the most likable of people, but very interesting. Of course, Eleanor has this wealthy aunt who is very elderly, and there's talk of her will, and there are anonymous letters being sent. There are just so many layers to it, and it's so fun unraveling them all. And I kind of went nuts with notes when I was reading this. I took notes and was trying to figure out what was going on, and I didn't figure it out, but it was just so fun. I really, really loved this book. Such a great Agatha Christie. Would highly recommend. 5 stars. Next up is a historical Christian fiction that I very, very much enjoyed, and it was such a pleasant surprise, and that is Chasing Shadows by Lynn Austen. The last book I read by this author, I enjoyed, but I didn't love it, and I went in with tempered expectations because I've been kind of struggling with finding really, really great Christian fiction novels recently, and I've talked a lot about my thoughts on that and why I struggle, so I'm not going to get into it, but this book was wonderful. I gave it 4.5 stars. It was so beautiful and just heart-wrenching, and it really, really tugged at my heartstrings, and I could not put it down. It's set during the German occupation of the Netherlands during World War II, and it really felt kind of like the hiding place in that sense, as we have the resistance working to hide Jews. And one of our main characters, Lena, reminded me a little bit of Corrie ten Boom as well. And the way that the author explored motherhood with Lena's character was just so beautiful, and all the struggles of being a wife and a mom trying to run a farm when the Nazis are taking everything. And her oldest daughter is also a main character named Ans, and she goes off to the big city with these big dreams, and she's kind of tired of feeling stifled in her farm community and kind of that footloose vibe with Ans. But this kind of rebellious spirit is challenged when she goes to the big city and learns of the resistance and becomes part of it, and ends up helping this woman who is struggling with PTSD from the Great War. And just the depth that this book went to was just beautiful. And then we have a Jewish character named Miriam and her new husband and baby, and they are kind of being hidden by the resistance, end up separated, and their story was also very, very emotional and beautiful. And Miriam is a violinist as well, and I loved the themes of music in this book. It was just beautiful. On Goodreads, I said that I found this to be a gem within Christian fiction that is anything but trite or preachy, and I loved learning about the Nazi invasion of the Netherlands, something I knew very little about besides what I had read in The Hiding Place. It's definitely one of my favorite memoirs, so the connections there were really nice. And I will say the reason it's not a full 5 stars, the first half was quite slow going for me, and it took me a little while to kind of connect to the characters in the way that I feel is, you know, a Miriam connection, if that makes sense. But it is such an engrossing and emotionally impactful read. Would highly recommend this one. And in another video that I posted, I believe the first week of June, if I'm not mistaken, is a video all about The Winter's Tale by Shakespeare. It is a play that I read, and then a couple days later, I ended up going to see a production of it at the Stratford Festival here in Ontario. What an experience. So the play I gave 3.5 stars, but watching it on stage elevated that to another level. And this is why it's so important to me that I not only read the play, but see a production of it, even if it's not the greatest production ever, but truly such a fascinating and weird play. But anyways, I did talk all about this in a video, which I will also have linked below. A lot of videos that I'm referencing in this video, but I'm not gonna repeat my thoughts on it. But I will say, I have been inspired to pay a lot more attention to the wit of Shakespeare and some of his more deep, I guess, insights into humanity and everything. And the way that I started little journals with flowers and artists and all of that, I have started a Shakespeare journal as well. So I'm just going to keep track of my favorite quotes, the quotes that kind of, I guess, stand out to me. And I have yet to go through the Winter's Tale quotes, but there is another Shakespeare play I read in June that I have thoughts to share on later on in the video. So I already wrote some of my favorite quotes from that play in this notebook, but I did want to share that quickly. And yeah, I really enjoyed this play. Enjoyed it a lot more seeing it on stage, but wanted to mention that as well. And the video is below if you wanted to hear a little bit more about the play itself and my experience watching it. I also read Faro's Daughter by Georgette Hare, and I buddy read this with my friend Anne from In Search of Wonder. This is one of Georgette Hare's Regency romances, and it's not a favorite. I gave this one 3 stars. I thought it was fun. It was so silly and over the top that it was a bit too much, too silly and over the top for my personal tastes. And I feel like Anne felt similarly as well, but there's still a lot of fun and humor and wit to be had in Georgette Hare's books. So I did have some good laughs and everything, but overall I thought it was fine, middle of the road. It took me forever to read this book. I started it in the beginning of May and finished it in June. I don't know, I couldn't really get into it, and it ended up feeling a little bit like a chore to finish this. And even though there are aspects of it that I enjoyed, I don't know, I never really got in the groove of this book. But anyways, we have a Mr. Max Ravenscar, who is a renowned gamester, and his aunt is asking for his help because his cousin is in love with this woman whose aunt runs a gaming establishment. And this is a big no-no. They are of different social classes, and his aunt is like, get him away from this girl. She is not good for him, yada yada. This woman, Deborah, is quite the lady. There's a lot more to Deb, and Max notices that too, and the story goes from there. He finds that none of his experience in risk or gambling has prepared him for such a worthy or beguiling opponent. And that is indeed the truth. I will say the banter between Max and Deb was so funny and just next level and over the top and just silly. And honestly, Max was a great character. Very shrewd and smart and funny without trying to be. The enemies to lovers just became a little too intense, and the lack of communication became a little annoying. But anyways, those are my thoughts on Faro's Daughter. It was fun, but not a favorite. I'm happy to say I have another Christian historical fiction on this list that is a 4-star read and one that I very much enjoyed, and I would definitely reread this in the future. I thought it was very enjoyable, and that is The Love Note by Joanna Davidson Politano. And I have read this author before. I've read 2 of her books, and I thought they were good. She writes beautifully and just has a way with words. She's very atmospheric in her writing. But there's just a part of me that struggled to take the stories seriously, if that makes sense. And I know I'm not the only one in that regard. You have to kind of suspend disbelief with some of her plot points. But this book was lovely. It was very enchanting in a way. And I did like our main character. I really liked the plot line in particular. And I loved the male love interest, which was really nice. I was very glad that I didn't find myself rolling my eyes at any of the romantic portions. I really did enjoy this one. And our main character, it is set in the Victorian era in England, and our main character, Willa, is a very intelligent woman. She wants to be a doctor like her father. Her father, of course, wants her to marry well, and that's kind of his life goal for her, but she is adamant that she wants to go to medical school. She wants to be one of the first women in England to go to med school. And one day she randomly finds a love letter in this old desk that she got from an estate. This estate belongs to a family that she knew growing up, and this letter is tied to someone on the estate. She just doesn't know who, and it's very mysterious. So to kind of build on her medical skills, she takes up a position as a nurse for the mistress of this estate. And so she gets to see the Gresham family again, who she knew as a young girl. And so she's there trying to, solve this mystery, and the family, the Gresham family, they themselves are very mysterious, very hush-hush. They don't have the healthiest of family relationships, interpersonal relationships. Things are a little complicated and tense. And Willa, being Willa, is trying to kind of bring everyone together and make things better. And she may also have some feelings for one of the sons, and the story goes from there. And it was beautiful. Like I was saying, it's set on the seaside, and I loved the descriptions. I loved the author's writing, and it was very atmospheric, and it's a great time to read this book as well. I mentioned liking the romance. I wasn't sure at first, but I was convinced by the end. What I really liked about this book was the, exploration of strained family relationships and how healing comes about. And there was miscommunication, but in a way that feels very realistic, unfortunately, and in a way where an unhealthy family will not communicate with each other. And I just found that to be realistic, convincing. And I wanted to share a quick little part here where one of the doctors, who is kind of a side character, he prescribes something to one of the sisters of the Gresham family. And it says, "Official script for Miss Celeste Gresham, written by Dr. Tillman. One holiday to be taken for the course of a full week. Nightly hot baths with fresh scented soap, a full cleanse of all worrying thoughts into a notebook or a good friend. Daily diet of scripture to replace falsehoods, fear, and worry. Avoid infectious ailments such as pessimism and anger and those who carry them. And I just found that to be very, very inspiring, and I should take that prescription and apply it to myself. I really, really loved that. I did give it 4 stars. It wasn't that perfect 5-star read. I will say Willa kind of gave off the slightly annoying I'm not like other girls vibe. She herself actually says the words, I'm not like other girls. So it's not just me. And Willa's chapters were all in first person, while the other chapters from other characters' perspectives were in third. And I personally wish all of them were in third. I do prefer third person. That's just a personal preference. So that kind of brought it down a little bit for me as well. And then a few aspects of the story I had to suspend disbelief in the same way I had to with her other books that I read, which were Finding Lady Enderley and Lady Jane Disappears. But this is definitely my favorite of the 3, and I very much enjoyed it and would recommend. It was very, very fun, and I would definitely reread it in the future. I thought it was great. This next book is unfortunately my least favorite book that I read over the last 2 months, and normally when I figure out a book is not the book for me, I DNF it, and I still don't know why I pushed through this. I think I kept hoping that it would turn out differently than it did, but unfortunately the book I'm talking about is 3 Words for Goodbye by Hazel Gaynor and Heather Webb, and this is a novel of 2 sisters embarking on a journey that changes everything. First of all, this author duo, I really do love how they write, and I adored their book, The Last Christmas in Paris. It is one of my favorite books of all time, and I am not put off reading them by any means. I will continue to try their co-authored works and their individual works, and I think they're great writers, and I'm excited to read more from them. But it's the plot of this book that really just was not it for me, and the way that the character stories played out. The book is set in the late 1930s. It's right before World War II is about to begin, and these 2 girls, Clara and Madelyn, are given a very interesting task by their grandmother, who is unfortunately dying. Her wish is that they would travel the world together. And the idea is because they are estranged and they don't have the best of relationships, the grandmother is hoping that this will kind of bring them together in a beautiful way and heal their relationship and everything. She wants them to travel to Europe and deliver a few letters for her. And rather than mailing them out, she feels this is the best way to go about doing this. And if any of you have heard of Nellie Bly, who traveled the world in, I believe it was 72 days, in this book, the grandmother was a friend of Nellie Bly. So fictionally, she was a friend of this real woman, and she's inspired by her. The girls are also inspired by Nellie Bly in their travels, and they embark on this journey. And we spend some time in France, in Italy. We see little bits of political turmoil in Europe as Hitler has risen to power. And what's interesting is Clara, the older sister, she sees this as an opportunity to spend the last few months before her wedding kind of, in freedom, and to just do things that she enjoys, look at the art scene in Europe and that sort of thing. And then Madelyn is an aspiring journalist. So she sees this as an opportunity to learn about all the political things going on. And unfortunately, rather than a story that felt very deep and emotionally impactful, like I was expecting, it ended up just being a story where, emotional affairs and infidelity and that sort of thing were excused, and there was just more to it that bothered me quite a bit. I love stories that explore sister relationships, and that aspect was pretty well done, but the plot just wasn't it for me, and there were a lot of very convenient plot points thrown in. It was very predictable. The summary at the back basically tells you the entire story as well. Like, you know exactly how the story is going to play out, except for one reveal, if you will, and I even found that reveal to not be all that interesting personally. But again, I'm not put off by reading their books, and I've seen many other reviewers say that this is not their best, and that if you don't like this one, try their other works because they are much better. So I am not put off, and I don't think it's a terrible book. It's just the type of story that doesn't work for me and my personal tastes. So yes, unfortunately it is a 2-star read. It's probably my least favorite book of the year so far, but I am excited to try more from them because they are talented writers. So that was 3 Words for Goodbye. Next up, from Tennyson's poems, I read a very, very long poem called In Memoriam, and it took up about that much of the collection. It was very long, and it actually took him many years to write as well. So it was quite the poem, and it was quite the journey reading it as well. Tennyson did write this poem, like I said, over many years, and it was his way of expressing and exploring his grief over the death of his very, very close friend, Hallam, who was actually supposed to marry Tennyson's sister, and unfortunately he passed away. So of course it explores grief, it explores what it means to love. It also explores humanity's relationship to the natural world and the divine world. And I was reading up on some commentaries on the poem, and interestingly, I would not have picked up on this because I have not read the Divine Comedy yet, which I am hoping to change that very soon. But the poem is structured in a way that it follows the structure of the Divine Comedy, where we have it kind of split into 3 sections. One part is kind of like the Inferno, then Purgatorio, and then Paradiso. So it's like 3 general sections divided into cantos like the Divine Comedy, and it makes me even more excited to read the Divine Comedy. I felt kind of weird rating this poem because it's a very personal one to Tennyson. I mean, I feel like all poetry can be said to be personal in a way, but this one was very much his grief journey, and I never want to judge how someone grieves, ever. I will say some ways that he expressed his grief about Hallam's death was interesting. I'm not saying that he idolized his friendship with Hallam, but some aspects of the poem almost felt that way. I don't know. I think I just felt a little surprised at the intensity of some of Tennyson's sentiments towards Hallam. I don't mean it to sound judging at all. And it's funny for me to say that because I am a very deeply feeling, passionate person, and I feel things intensely. So I shouldn't be judging, but it just felt a little intense at times. And I could be 100% wrong in how I'm reading into some of the passages. But anyways, if I were to rate this poem, I would probably give it 4 stars. It was very, very long, at times very repetitive in the things it was saying and the ideas it was, I guess, expressing. And there were some really interesting and relatable aspects to it. The prologue of the poem kind of goes into how death makes life feel meaningless, and talks about the fact that we're made in God's image and we have free will, and it's just reflecting on the divine. And then in the depths of the Inferno section, we're getting into how grief robs you of peace and sleep, and there are different scenes at Christmas time in the poem where everything just feels so empty. And Tennyson actually says in one of the stanzas basically that people criticize how others grieve, and here I am doing that very thing. But I don't know, it was interesting. It was very, very interesting and very moving at times, and I did highlight quite a bit because there were a lot of beautiful passages. There's one stanza where he's staring at Hallam's house through the rain, and it says, "Dark house, by which once more I stand, here in the long unlovely street, doors, where my heart was used to beat so quickly, waiting for a hand that can be clasped no more. Behold me, for I cannot sleep, and like a guilty thing I creep at earliest morning to the door. He is not here, but far away. The noise of life begins again, and ghastly through the drizzling rain on the bald street breaks the blank day." The parts of it that I struggled with were, I guess, the parts where Tennyson got very, very philosophical, and I didn't always follow what he was trying to say, but overall, it was a very powerful poem. And I do have a notebook where I'm keeping track of my favorite stanzas and passages from poems, and just a couple of my favorite ones from In Memoriam. From the prologue, it says, "Forgive these wild and wandering cries, confusions of a wasted youth. Forgive them where they fail in truth, and in thy wisdom make me wise." So there he was praying to the Lord. And this next one is a favorite too. It says, "I hold it true, whate'er befall, I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." And I feel like that one other people have probably heard too. But anyways, those were just some of my very disorganized thoughts on In Memoriam, a very, very interesting and powerful poem. Then I read a book that I was very much in the mood to reread. It is a book I read a few years ago, and I fell in love with this entire series, and I plan on rereading it throughout the summer. And I read the first book in June, which is Cinder by Marissa Meyer. It is the first book in the Lunar Chronicles, and it is science fiction. And even though I'm not a sci-fi person, I am a fairy tale retelling person, and I love this series. I love the first book. I gave it 4.5 stars on this reread, and It is a retelling of Cinderella, if you can't tell by the title, and I feel like everyone has read this book, or at least has heard about it and knows what it's about. But it's kind of set in a futuristic world, and we're in New Beijing, and this girl, Cinder, is a cyborg. So she has parts, I guess, of her body that are mechanical rather than, you know, bone and tissue and everything. And she ends up meeting the Prince of New Beijing, Kai, and ends up embroiled in this intergalactic, I guess, conflict with the moon and Queen Lavanna, who rules on the moon. And it all has to do with this plague that is ravaging the world. And there's talk of this missing lunar princess. And Cinder doesn't really know about her own past. She lives with her stepmother and stepsisters. And it is such a fun ride, and I loved this reread, and I'm very excited to continue the series. It is such a great series, so much fun. I'm very excited to continue with the second book, which is Scarlet, and then Cress, and then Winter, but had a great time rereading this and can't wait to continue. This next book, just looking at it, brings me so much joy, and I want to reread it. But I'm kind of glad that I don't need to reread it because there are more books in this series, and I'm so excited to continue. But I am talking about Mrs. Tim of the Regiment by D.E. Stevenson. This was just perfection to me. I loved it so much. Oh my goodness. 5 big, big stars. When I finished this, I was giddy. I had a big smile on my face. It was everything I wanted it to be. And I think the reason I was able to really, really fall in love with it is because I took my time with it. I did not rush it. I treated it almost like I was reading someone's journal, and that's kind of how you're supposed to read it. It is journal entries, all from our main character, Hester Christie, and she is an army wife, a mother of 2. It is set in the interwar years, and her husband has been stationed in Scotland, so the family moves to Scotland, and this book is set over, I believe, 6 months, from January to June of 1 year. And so they moved to Scotland, and there are just such a huge host of characters introduced. You do not need to know them all. I was very, very overwhelmed at first, I'm not gonna lie, because there were so many characters, and I wrote all their names down thinking they would all be important. They are not all important. The important ones you get to know enough, but oh my gosh, I loved this book. I'm just gonna read my Goodreads review because it really summarizes my thoughts nicely. Otherwise, I will just go on and on and on. But I basically said that every entry made me smile, some made me laugh out loud, many made me just fall in love more and more with Hester. I loved her innocence and pure heart, her love of life and empathy for those around her. She reminded me so much of my mom, which is very, very true. Very true. I can't gush about this book enough. The Christie's army friend Tony was also a favorite, swoon-worthy character. I was nervous about his obvious attraction to Hester and where that would lead, but appreciated that he remained honorable throughout the entirety of his time with her and her family, never stepping over boundaries. There isn't much of a traditional plot throughout, and sometimes it feels like not much happens, but I really enjoyed the episodical, epistolary format and never felt bored. It also helps that I really took my time with this book, reading it over 2 months. The second half of the book is set over a fortnight as Hester enjoys a little holiday away in the Scottish Highlands with her daughter and her good friend Mrs. Loudon. Or Loudon, I wasn't sure how to pronounce that. This section was glorious. The descriptions of the Highlands breathtaking. So good, a new favorite book of all time. I loved this book, and like I mentioned, I think the first half of this book is January to May, and it's just random journal entries that Hester shares of all the little things that go on in her life, but it is so cozy and full of humor and life, and it delves into parenthood in the 1930s and how things changed from the Victorian era to the current time that this book was written. As D.E. Stevenson, she was a mother too, and she kind of wrote this in a way to express what life was like for her. I believe her husband was also in the army. I could totally be wrong, but from what I remember, she kind of wrote this as a way to share with her friends what being an army wife is like. But it gives you such a fun look into a middle-class British family in that time period. It goes into motherhood and marriage, and I love the wry tongue-in-cheek humor, and I loved everything about this book. And then the second half, which is set throughout the month of June over 14 days, was so quick. I flew through it. So the first half, I spent a lot of time just taking my time with it whenever I had a chance to pick up the book. And then the second half, I flew through because Hester spends time in Scotland on vacation, and every aspect of her time in Scotland, I was obsessed. It was as Scottish as Scotland gets. I can't even describe to you how Scottish it was. It was just perfect. And there is a fair at the very end that Hester goes to, which was so fun to read about. And there is an aspect of like feuding Scottish clans, and oh my gosh, it was wonderful. I love how Hester sees the world around her. I love how she has this almost childlike wonder of the world, and I don't know, she's so wonderful. She's one of my favorite characters of all time. And there's a part where she's in a hotel and she is writing in her journal, and it's just the sentimentality that she has is so relatable to me. And she says, I sleep dreamlessly and waken early, and soon the events of yesterday come crowding into my mind. And then she just looks around the room, and then she says, how many hundreds and thousands of people have awakened in this room, awakened to their sorrows and their joys, their hopes and their fears. Strange that I should have slept so well, untroubled by the haunting of their thoughts. One of my favorite quotes. Husbands are annoying at times, but they are a habit which grows on one, and life is extraordinarily dull without them. There are some heartwarming moments with her husband as well, and it's just, this book is everything. This book was actually one of the books that inspired the flower journal that I started because of all the flowers that are talked about and described. And I underlined and tabbed so many beautiful nature descriptions within Scotland. I just love the writing. There's one part where she writes, my thoughts drift across the garden and hang upon the trees like fairy lights, or curl upwards and vanish like the smoke of Burnside chimney. I can take a thought from the cupboard of my memory, just as I take a dress from my wardrobe, give it a little shake and put it on, or fold it away. How nice it is to lie here in blameless idleness and let these vagrant memories flow through my body like a cool stream. A bee drones past, seeking honey in the golden bells of the daffodils. From one to another he quests with intermittent buzz. Are the flowers secret to him as people are to me, or does he, tasting their sweetness, taste the very essence of their being and know their souls? Oh, I just love the writing. Oh my goodness. And she goes to the beach and she goes to the fair, and it's everything. And I love this book and I want to go to Scotland. And I said that I was going to read my Goodreads review so that I wouldn't do what I just did, and that is go on and gush. But that is Mrs. Tim of the Regiment. It won't be the book for everyone, but it sure was the book for me, and I adored it. Then we have Edenbrooke by Julianne Donaldson, and this one I gave 4 stars. I had such a fun time reading it. It was so heartwarming and wholesome, like truly wholesome. I am so glad I read this book. It's a Regency era romance, and I listened to it mostly on audio and alternated between the ebook and audio. And I thought the audiobook was narrated beautifully as well. It was just such a great read. Our main character, her name is Marianne, and she is invited by her sister to join her at this estate called Edenbrooke. It's in the countryside, and it's a way for her to escape her boredom in Bath. She is currently living in Bath with her grandmother. On her way to this estate, she comes into contact with a highwayman and ends up rescued. And the story kind of goes in an unexpected direction, and she ends up meeting the heir to the estate, and the story goes from there. And it is just so fun and heartwarming and very cozy and perfect to read in the summertime as well. Just for me personally, it was a little bit on the saccharine side, a little too much just for me personally, but it could have been a 5-star read for me. But I do like a little more than just, a simple Regency romance, I guess. And there is more to the story. It's not lacking in depth by any means. There are beautiful themes explored as well, and there were some very moving moments towards the end involving some of Marianne's family members that we don't see until the end of the book, and it was very beautifully written. I am excited to read more from this author. She also wrote a sequel, I think. I don't know if it's a sequel or a prequel to Edenbrooke, as well as a novel called Blackmore, which I'm excited to read as well. But that was Edenbrooke. Very enjoyable. All right, so next up we have 2 books in a series. They are books 2 and 3 in the series, and I buddy read these with my friend Shannon from Old American Spirit, and we both adored these books. I believe we both gave them 5 stars as well. The first one is Drake Hall, which is book 2 in the Secrets of Ormdale series by Christina Bear, and book 3 is Castle of the Winds. Oh my goodness, is this series a fun ride, and unexpectedly so. The first book in the series, Wormwood Abbey, I gave it 3.5 stars when I read it last fall. I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to continue the series. And I am so glad that Shannon encouraged, in a way, she kind of encouraged continuing the series. And I'm like, you know what? I'll give it a go. I'll try the second book, see what I think. I ended up reading the second book on Kindle and loved it so much that I ended up buying the rest of the series in physical copies. So book 2, Drake Hall, is set in May, which I love that bookish serendipity because I love reading books when they're set. So this one was set in May, and Castle of the Winds was set in June. So it was just perfect to read these in May and June. This one I didn't get a chance to annotate just because I read it on Kindle, but this one I could not stop the tapping. It was just so wonderful. In book 1, I didn't really like Edith all that much, and Shannon described it as getting off on the wrong foot with her, and I totally agree. And in book 2, I very much grew to love her. And if you don't know anything about this series, it is a cozy fantasy series set in the Victorian era, the late Victorian era, right around the turn of the century, but with dragons, and it's just the best. In book 1, Edith and her family moved to Wormwood Abbey, and it is a Yorkshire estate, and her father has basically inherited the estate. And they learn about the dragons that live here. They didn't realize they existed, and Edith learns a lot about her own abilities with dragons with regards to them. And in the second book, the stakes get higher. We learn more about dragon lore and dragons within the history of England, and the second book very much feels kind of like an ode to Elizabethan England and the Renaissance and everything, and I loved that so much. And there are so many references to books and literature and all of that, and I just ate it up. I don't want to say too much about the dragon aspect of the story if you are interested in the series and you haven't read the first book, just because it's fun to go in not knowing how the story is going to go and how the dragons are going to play a role in the story, especially in books 2 and 3. And I still have books 4 and 5 to read, which I plan on reading with Shannon later in the summer. But in book 3, we end up going to Wales, and we learn a lot about Welsh folklore and Welsh mythology, and it feels very, very Arthurian. I could see all the Arthurian references and inspiration that the author used. In the second book, Edith receives a very mysterious invitation to Wales, and the culmination of that experience is in this book. And this book ends on a cliffhanger, so I am very, very eager to continue with book 4. But these books are just, oh my goodness, they are wonderful. They are not perfect. They are not perfectly written, but they just deliver in exactly what I want from them. And it is cozy fantasy at its best, and I just can't put them down when I am reading them. There's also a potential love interest for Edith, and he is so, so fun to follow as well. And I couldn't get enough, especially with this book. The Welsh setting and the mountains and the forest, it felt so ethereal. And there is this feast that happens, this Midsummer celebration, and it feels like Edith is a fairy attending this feast. It is in the woodland, and I just couldn't get enough. And the dragons are so, so amazing to read about, the descriptions. And I love the author's note at the back getting into the folklore and mythology as well. But I just love this series so much, and I can't wait to continue. Both of these books got 5 stars. Wonderful, wonderful stories. This next book I'm not going to say too much about because I do want to film a video dedicated just to this book. I annotated it and I did color coordinate everything, and I plan on taking detailed notes because while I was reading it, I didn't. I just wanted to read it, experience it, and then I will kind of gather my thoughts. But I'm talking about Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. I gave this 5 stars. I read this book in 3.5 weeks while reading other books at the same time. I couldn't stop. And it's over 1,000 pages. I couldn't stop. What I will say is I have never disliked a character as much as I dislike Scarlett O'Hara. I have never felt as confused about my feelings towards a character as I have towards Rhett, and I've never felt as disturbed as I did reading this book when it comes to reading about slavery and the antebellum South, the Civil War, post-Civil War Reconstruction. The writing style captivated me. The lushness of the descriptions and the emphasis on the color red, especially in the pre-Civil War part of the book, where Scarlett lives with her family in Georgia. There's just so much emphasis on that color. And I mean, her name is Scarlett as well. So anyways, I'm not going to share much else because again, I want to gather my thoughts. Oh, there are so many things that I'm thinking still about this book. I did read this book actually with a group of lovely ladies, and we had some really, really great discussions about the book, and I was invited to join them by Amy from Amy of Hearth Ridge, and I believe Amy is still reading the book. So again, we haven't like fully wrapped up our thoughts on the book, and I also do want to really sit down and kind of go through my tabs because this is insanity. But I was just in awe reading this book, and not always in a good way. There are a lot of very difficult things in this book, a lot of very off-putting things, but it's supposed to be off-putting. Slavery is still going on in parts of the world. If you don't feel deeply about these things, that's a little concerning. But anyways, Gone with the Wind was one of the best books I've ever read. One of my favorite books. 5 stars. We will come back to this at some point. I have 2 more stories to get through, one of which is a favorite from the Chronicles of Narnia, and that is The Silver Chair. I loved The Silver Chair so much. I've said before that the Chronicles of Narnia is a series that I've enjoyed. I'm enjoying reading them, but I don't feel a strong connection to it in the way that other people do. I don't know, I almost feel like I'm missing out because I don't have that deep love for the series the way that other people do. But I feel like that could change upon a reread, especially because I do love The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I love that story, and I loved The Silver Chair. I really, really loved our main characters, Eustace, which he was in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader as well, and he was fun to follow in that story. But we see Eustace again in this story, as well as his school friend Jill. And in the story, they are transported to Narnia, and they're sent on this mission by Aslan to basically find the lost prince of Narnia, Prince Rilian. And he is the son of a favorite character, and I don't know if I want to say, but I'm like, if you've read the book, you know. But either way, I just loved the adventure that these kids got up to, and their no-nonsense approach to everything was really fun to follow as well. And my favorite character was definitely Puddleglum. What an endearing marshwiggle of a character. I loved him so much, and I just loved every little thing about this story. And I don't know what it is about it that just, it spoke to me in such a beautiful way, and I felt myself feeling like almost like chills towards the end of the story. It was very, very powerful and beautiful, and there are talking owls, and there are giants and gnomes, and really great themes, and I just loved it. And I can't believe I only have 1 left to read. I have been reading it chronologically as it is in this collection, and I have The Last Battle to read, and then when I do reread the series, I think I'm going to try to read them in publication order, which would be interesting, but I have enjoyed reading them in chronological order so I can kind of get an idea of how the world has changed and evolved and everything, and I am so glad I loved it as much as I did. One of the best things Puddleglum said, I can't remember if they were trapped underground, but there's a part where they're, I think, at the bottom of the world, if you will, and the one thing that Puddleglum said made me chuckle, but basically it says, "Courage, friends," came Prince Rilian's voice. "Whether we live or die, Aslan will be our good lord." "That's right, sir," said Puddleglum's voice, "and you must always remember there's one good thing about being trapped down here. It'll save funeral expenses." I really hope when I reread the series that I fall in love with it in a deep way. But anyways, that was The Silver Chair. I am excited, but also kind of sad to be reading The Last Battle. It's the last story in the series, but that is The Silver Chair. I truly cannot believe how many books I gave 5 stars in the last couple months. I have had such a wonderful last couple of reading months, but last but not least, we have A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. Oh my goodness, I'm in love with this play, and I want to reread it already. I couldn't get enough. Also, this cover is the best cover I have seen of this play. I love Bottom so much, and he deserves to be on the cover of every edition. A description of the play says, "It is a raucous comedy that thrusts a quartet of reckless young lovers headfirst into a world of magic and fantasy." And that is the truth. I did read this play in high school, I think in grade 9, but I remembered absolutely nothing about it other than it had fairies and was inspired by Greek myth. That is all I remembered about it. And in high school, I was not a huge reader, especially of classics. So I'm just so glad that I have fallen in love with Shakespeare. But this play, it's just wild. It's hilarious. It's whack. it's madcap, it's just funny. There's like a love rectangle and the fairies get involved. Fairies should never get involved in human affairs because it always goes awry. And Oberon, king of the fairies, gives this one particular fairy, Puck, a very simple task and he messes it up and things go crazy. I loved the characters of Helena and Hermia and Lysander and Demetrius, and I really liked Theseus and Hippolyta as well. Everything about this play was great. Bottom was my favorite, and Bottom and the Mechanicals, they put on a play towards the end of this play in the 5th act. I was dying of laughter. It was so funny, especially because I was actually reading it and then watching the act. So I read the act, then I watched the Globe production of it. There was a video of it on the Internet Archive webpage, and it was just hilarious. Bottom is one of the funniest characters I've ever had the pleasure of meeting in literature, and there are just so many things that he says wrong, like malapropisms, and it is so funny. He is so funny. I love that there's a play within the play, and that was also, like I said, hilarious, and I laughed out loud so many times. But there was just so much Greek myth that I wouldn't have understood without all the commentary at the end. And a huge chunk, most of this play is inspired by Ovid's Metamorphoses, which I really want to read now. And I feel like I would gain a lot more from this play after having read it. So that is on my list. But this play is just so fun and just one of the best plays I've ever read and watched, and it has really fun themes of love and jealousy, dreams and what's real versus fantastical, and order versus disorder, and the power of the imagination is huge. And I also listened to the Literary Life episodes on this play, which were fantastic as well, and I have nothing else to say. It was just wonderful, and I could gush about it, and I want to reread it already. And there were just so many wonderful, hilarious things to note, which I did in my little Shakespeare notebook. I did write down my favorite passages from A Midsummer Night's Dream, and one of my favorite insults is Lysander to Hermia after Puck does his thing and messes things up. And Lysander says, "You minimus of hindering not grass made." I love that. And then Hermia to Helena when they're really having it out. "Oh me, you juggler, you canker blossom, you thief of love. What, have you come by night and stolen my love's heart from him?" And she also says, "I am not yet so low, but that my nails can reach unto thine eyes." Because Hermia's on the shorter side. Anyways, it's just so great. So many quotable passages from this play. I loved it so much. I love Shakespeare, and I'm so glad that I'm falling more and more in love with his plays, and I'm feeling a lot less intimidated by them, and I'm just having the best time with his plays. But that is the last book on this very long list of wonderful reads from the last couple of months. I am just amazed at all the 5 stars. I'm just so happy with how my reading has gone. It's been wonderful. My reading life, like I was saying at the beginning of the video, has been so enriched, and I am just so content, and I hope it continues. So far it is continuing into July, which I'm very happy about. But friends, that is it for this very long wrap up. Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate each of you for taking time out of your day to listen to me ramble. It means a lot. Thank you so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.